Good afternoon, everybody. Alexander Müller from TMG. This is a good start because the moderator had problems to dial in. And if I have managed it to join, then everybody has managed to join. And thanks, Bruno, for having opened this meeting. And I'm very happy, unless I receive a different instruction, to welcome all of you. My name is Alexander Müller. I'm the managing director of TMG, the think tank of sustainability based in Berlin. And I'm really happy and I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of TMG, as well as on behalf of our partners and co-hosts, very important, long-standing partners, very successful collaboration, WWF Mesoamerica and ADIMI from Guatemala, as well as the Watershed Organization Trust in India. So good morning, buenos dias to Guatemala, and to other colleagues in the Americas, good evening and namaste to India. I hope I have pronounced it in the right way. Good afternoon to all of you in Europe and also in Africa. Schön euch zu sehen, to use also the German language. We are really very delighted to see so many of you from all over the world joining this webinar. I have seen shortly before I joined this webinar that we had more than 400 registrations from all over the world to join this webinar on a very important topic called roadmaps for scaling up ecosystem-based adaptation. We are going to present to you, our colleagues are going to present to you insights from India and Guatemala. Let me be very frank. We are living in a time of multiple crises. And ecosystems are our life support system. And if we want to manage and tackle these multiple crises, we not only have to conserve and maintain ecosystems, but we also have to think about how to use ecosystems for adaptation. And this is what the webinar is all about, because our colleagues in Guatemala and India have worked very hard over the last years. They have made a lot of progress. They have very good experiences, and that's what they are going to present to you. I don't have to refer to a report all of you know, the IPCC report published a few weeks ago, and this has emphasized that we are already in the climate crisis. 5 years ago, we thought the climate crisis is about to come. Now we are in the climate crisis. And of course, different parts of the world are in different stages of the climate crisis. In the end, it will affect all of us in different ways. So we have witnessed worst floods in Western Europe. We have seen the pictures from New York with the metro station being flooded. We have seen the wildfires, the bushfires in Southern Europe and in Asia. We have seen droughts everywhere. And greenhouse gas emissions are still going up. And we know they have to be reduced drastically, immediately. And we in the industrialized countries have the biggest obligation to really do it. So we must reduce emissions, but at the same time, and that's what we are talking about, we have to adapt to changing climatic conditions. If we don't do it, we all know it will have devastating effects. And the protection, the use of ecosystems, they play a very, very important role. And this is what ecosystem-based adaptation, short EBA, is all about. It is using the power of nature, but it means also using it wisely. And we have good examples. EBA is about creating natural flood control, protecting landscapes, protecting nature along the rivers. We are talking about biodiversity, protecting vegetation, soil fertility. We're talking about agroforestry. We're talking about natural terraces, about to protect groundwater. So the key question is, what do we have to do to tackle the climate crisis, to adapt to changing climatic conditions with the help of ecosystems? Ecosystem-based adaptation is, from my perspective, a systemic answer to the challenges we are facing. So we need to unfold this potential of EBA, and we would like to learn the lessons from our colleagues and friends who are going to present today. EBA is not really new. It has been practiced over many years. It has been labeled differently, but now it is gaining increased global attention. And from my perspective, it is a strategic adaptation approach to climate change. It is not one of the many technologically driven adaptation topics. It is about how to use nature, the power of nature, to adapt to changing climatic conditions. And we have to talk about what kind of lessons have we learned and how can we scale it up. So upscaling is one of the key words I have heard many, many times over the last decades. Very often, upscaling is meant in a way that we have to have bigger projects. We have to have more projects. This is maybe only one step. Today, we would like to go a step beyond. We are talking about how can we create the enabling conditions under which EBA can thrive and can be scaled up. Enabling conditions, what types of alliances do we need? What kind of roadmaps, we're all talking about today about roadmaps, do we have to develop? What kind of policies do we need to help us to overcome the huge gaps which we currently have to admit when it comes to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change? We want to achieve synergies in both. I'm deeply convinced that every dollar invested in sustainable development has to serve multiple purposes. And ecosystem-based adaptation is very, very at the forefront in doing so. And I again have to say, I'm really excited to explore these important questions with such an interesting and diverse panel. I already mentioned more than 400 registrations. We know not everybody is immediately at the beginning of such a meeting present, but we will see over time that we are having more and more people. The countries who have registered: Guatemala, Costa Rica, India, Thailand, United States, Canada, Germany, UK, South Africa, and me from Italy. So you, the panelists, you have the opportunity to really speak to the world. Please explain what you have experienced in Guatemala. What are the lessons learned in India? Because we need to set up a global network in order to learn the lessons and to scale up. But as in every meeting, after the introduction, the most important second agenda item is following, and the agenda item is called housekeeping. This is so important that they don't allow me to do it. And therefore, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Bruno from TMG. He has to make some housekeeping announcements, and he's going to tell you how to behave, what to do. Bruno, over to you, please.
Thanks a lot, Alexander. Hi, everyone. Hola a todos. Welcome to this webinar. So just a few little technical briefing for you. I will try to be brief. So as you've seen, we have panelists and attendees in the call today. And of course, we want to make it interactive and participative for everyone. So all questions and comments are welcome, obviously. And these should be written in the Q&A section. So if you go to the bottom bar, there's a Q&A where there you will be able to ask questions, whether in English or in Spanish. You can write questions and comments, and participants can also upvote questions to stress their importance or agree with the question and wishing that it might be answered. And this is important for us because it will be helpful to select the questions to be posed to the panelists. During this Q&A session, we will address as many questions as possible. But in the meantime, you can also write comments and questions coming, and some questions will be answered orally and some questions will be answered in written. If you have any technical issue, we would like you to use the chat. So in the bottom bar, there is also a chat function, and this should be used really for technical issues, and we'll try to help you as soon as possible. So chat, technical issues, Q&A for questions and comments. We would like to ask also everyone to keep your mics on mute during the session. And of course, if you are also on Twitter, you can tweet about the session by using the hashtag upscalingEBA. So this is all on my side. Wishing you a great webinar and talk to you later.
Thanks a lot, Bruno. And I know you are following the chat very closely. So if there are questions to Bruno, please approach him via the chat function so that he can reply to you. Okay, now I'm really excited, I have to say. Let's get started. And it's my real pleasure, and it's also an honor to introduce our first keynote speaker to you, the Vice Minister of Water, Mr. Neri Martin Mendes y Mendes from Guatemala. It is really an honor that you, Vice Minister, are taking your time to address this topic, and we take this as a very clear signal that you personally and Guatemala is providing support for EBA. And we could, over the last months in the work together with our partners, we can really see it. The ministry has been part of developing a roadmap for upscaling EBA as part of a multi-stakeholder platform. Their acknowledgement and political support to integrate EBA into different policies has been crucial. Without your support, it would not have been worked. And you have motivated others to join this EBA alliance. Since March this year, the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources has taken over the Secretariat for EBA. And therefore, it's my real pleasure to give the floor to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to address this webinar. Thanks a lot for all your support. The floor is yours.
Muy buenos días. Vamos a probar con el audio nada más. Repetía que para Guatemala la adaptación basada en ecosistemas contribuye a reducir la vulnerabilidad de quienes estamos viviendo principalmente en las cuencas. Guatemala tiene 38 cuencas principales muy importantes. Varias de ellas tienen relación con otros países como México, Belice, Honduras, El Salvador. Para nosotros es importante la adaptación basada en ecosistemas, ya que una serie de eventos que están afectando a todos los países, incluyendo a Guatemala, por ejemplo, las inundaciones ocasionadas recientemente por los huracanes ETA y IOTA, afectaron miles de personas y poblaciones, sobre todo en el lado norte del país. Las inundaciones cada vez son más frecuentes y también al mismo tiempo tenemos sequías. Se espera que estos eventos vuelvan cada vez más frecuentes e intensos debido al cambio climático. Por eso es importante para nuestro país, Guatemala, mejorar y mantener los servicios cruciales que provean las cuencas. Es necesario hacerlas más resilientes y adaptables a la variabilidad y al cambio climático. En este esfuerzo multilateral y de varios países como India, es importante seguir desarrollando alianzas con nuestros países vecinos, pero también con aquellos que tienen muy buenas experiencias, como es el caso de India y de Costa Rica y de nuestros países vecinos, México, El Salvador, Honduras. Entonces, gracias por incluirnos en este esfuerzo de varios países. Para Guatemala, el tener un viceministerio del agua en donde uno de sus objetivos principales es fortalecer las alianzas público-privadas en relación con las cuencas. Para eso tenemos un acuerdo presidencial en Junta de Ministros relacionados con el Acuerdo Gubernativo 19-2021 de este año, en donde se crean mesas técnicas a nivel de las cuencas. Tenemos el gran reto de 38 mesas técnicas principales de cuencas y más de 2,000 mesas técnicas en relación con las microcuencas. Nuevamente, agradezco la inclusión de Guatemala en este esfuerzo. Muchos éxitos y feliz día.
Thank you so very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Neri Mardin Mendes y Mendes. We could hear your message very loud and clear. And we also had the pleasure to look at a picture of you, but we could not see you live. So thank you very much for having taken your time. Let me add also personally to you. We know that adaptation is a technical topic. Adaptation needs participation. But we have also learned, especially because of your support, that it is also a political issue. Adaptation and complex adaptation measures, especially EBA, it requires political support. Otherwise, it will never go beyond the project level. Again, thank you very much for having participated here and for your very clear message. I would now like to give the floor to another honorary guest. I had already called him and I can see him on my screen, Dr. Ashok Dalwai. He is the director of the National Rainfed Areas Authority in India. And as part of the Ministry for Agriculture and Farmers' Welfare, its mandate is to design and plan watershed development programs, a very popular approach to sustainable landscape management in India. And Dr. Dalwai has also been very supportive and active in contributing to the development of a roadmap for upscaling EBA in Maharashtra. And therefore, we are really excited that you are here, dear Dr. Dalwai. What means EBA in the Indian context? What kind of political attention has it gained so far? And I have to say, what I really like is that we have two very different countries, Guatemala and India, in this meeting to showcase that EBA can be applied in very different circumstances on different continents. But what is needed is the exchange and to learn the lessons. And therefore, the floor is yours, and we are looking forward to listen to you. Welcome.
Very much for your efforts and this invite. Namaskar to everyone across the globe. I'm using the Indian format of saluting you all so that we do not compromise on the time zones that we are in differently. I would like to share over the next 5 minutes that India realizes the importance of the ecosystem-based adaptation, for it recognizes that this brings in comprehensiveness. How has India accepted this? I can substantiate through a number of initiatives, but primarily, as far as EBA personally specifically is concerned, it is now undertaken in the state of Maharashtra, which is a very large state, which is an arid zone. And therefore, the impact of climate change, which is likely to be much more sharp, in that context, the choice of Maharashtra state is extremely appropriate. I have been privileged to be associated with all the stakeholders, including the principal actor, WOTR, led by Crispinos, to prepare this action plan. As I went through this motion, I personally appreciated the comprehensiveness of the ecosystem-based adaptation. I realized that not based on one component, it recognizes agriculture, which is the principal livelihood option for a majority in India, as a program that should be looking at all the aspects of livelihood. I would like to rather advocate the importance of EBA because it brings in, or it aims at resilience of the people primarily. It aims at resilience of the agriculture sector. It aims at improving the economic or the purchasing power of the rural communities. It aims at decentralized governance so that both planning as well as action become the responsibility of the local people themselves. And then it supports this scope by focusing on capacity building through information, knowledge, and governance responsibilities. And all this is possible only because it brings into play the collaborative effort to bring convergence, coordination, cooperation among all the stakeholders without making any discrimination between government and non-government actors. Now, this particular approach, which became sharper to me as I worked with WOTR and other actors who were there from both government of Maharashtra, from the civil society organizations, from the experts, from the scientists and academics who are all associated with this, that WOTR has adopted the principle based on three important pillars, that it is looking at community adaptive capacities. That is extremely good in a state like Maharashtra, where there's already a history of people prone to or more amenable to cooperative participation are easily brought into this particular form. Second, it had built its principle on ecosystem services and biodiversity. In arid or a semi-arid zone like Maharashtra, with rolling topography, deficiency of rainfall, and increasing weather extremes, an ecosystem-based approach is appropriate, and that's what WOTR has done. And then, of course, as I was saying, that not only is it believing in the community participation, it is also focusing on building their capacities. So these particular principles, which constitute the pivot for this EBA action plan, is highly appreciable, and it can become a demonstration for all other parts of the country, because India, being a tropical country, is highly vulnerable to climate change. We're already seeing weather extremes. We're seeing rising temperature. We're seeing change in the seasonality of the rainfall patterns, and a large part of India depends upon the southwest monsoons in particular. Now, talking particularly of what kind of initiatives have been made in India, it may not be called EBA, but I can tell you with confidence that the basic principles of EBA are already seen in various initiatives. The first initiative, as in respect of my own organization, which deals with national rainfed area, because 54% of India's cultivable land is under rainfed systems, whether it could be a deficient rainfall, it could be sometimes surplus rainfall, it could be a cold desert, because there are different ecosystems. But then people and agriculture are dependent on rainfall. So in this area, what we have now done is, the first thing is to identify the priority districts or the priority areas for intervention based on what is called a composite index. As normally happens, there's too much of focus on natural resources at the cost of the human resources. The composite index that we have developed now looks at both human development index and natural resource index. So take a large number of parameters, for example, related to human things. What is the level of their education? What is the level or percentage of people living below poverty line? How many people belong to the communities which are notified as highly deprived, or their access to markets? So various factors related to human development have also been taken into account to define the priority in respect of drought proofing. And of course, in terms of natural resources, the usual or suspects are there: the soil, for example, the rainfall, temperature, humidity, etc. So what we saw is that when we take both these factors into account, the ranking in terms of priority changes totally when we take only a natural resource index as the parameter. The second one is, we have now, based on this particular indices, we have started working in at least 24 districts across the country, where we have prepared a comprehensive drought proofing plan, which is based on landscape approach. We have gone beyond the traditional watershed approach, where there was emphasis on engineering tools, where there was an emphasis on soil and water management within the defined watershed, whether it's a micro watershed or a larger watershed. We're now looking at the landscape, which means that all that falls within the boundary of a watershed, as well as those areas, including the forests, the pasture lands, and common property resources that lie outside it also become now part of the watershed, the new drought proofing plan. And the third one is Government of India's emphasis to now base the agriculture on evidence. That means, how do we take up soil and nutrition management? Is it going to be indiscriminate, irrational? No. For the first time, in a way, India is the first country in the world which has adopted the universal soil health scheme, where we, based on samples from the farms, we determine the soil nutrient status and then advise the farmers to go in for evidence-based fertilization. So that is just one example to tell you that this combined with the organic farming, the natural farming, where the focus is on building organic carbon through various interventions, in a way is an EBA, because it reduces the cost of production, it builds the soil nutrition, builds the soil biology which has been neglected so far, and therefore makes production more sustainable. And then of course, the fourth one that I would like to highlight before I close is what is called the new generation watershed springshed development guidelines. For the first time, though India is the country that has been practicing watershed approach for the last 40 years, what we have now done is to build what is called a new generation watershed guideline, which says that not just natural resources, but human beings, whether they own land or they do not own land, every one of them in a particular community, in a particular habitation, becomes a stakeholder. The natural resources get compromised because those who do not access land can tend to disturb the forests, can tend to compromise the quality of the pasture lands and common property resources. So in the new watershed guidelines, we are now focusing on more of biological treatments. That means making interventions through perennial trees for carbon sequestration, building a green cover across the landscape, water management, so that we, based on demand, we then use the water. And along with that, what kind of alternate livelihood options can be built in, so that the people who do not own land or own less land, then they can use alternate means. For example, it could be livestock, or it could be processing, so that we add value to the primary agriculture produce. We add value to the biologically generated produce in the forest or on the pasture lands. So there are several initiatives that were made, and along with it, for the first time, we are now going to take up what is called springshed development, because we have 6 million springs in the Himalayan region. And on account of indiscriminate use, at least half of them have gone dry. And then the use of the life of springs are very important, because they provide water for drinking, they provide water for irrigation in the Himalayan region. So we, based on the same principle of watershed, we're now going to treat the spring sheds, and there too it will be comprehensive in the sense that people will be the center force, the governance will be given to them, and we're going to mobilize people. So lastly, let me tell you, Government of India has now taken up a comprehensive approach to mobilizing people through what is called farmer-producer organization. Given the agriculture structure, where the large majority of farmers are marginal farmers, we need to have people come together so that there is resource use efficiency, there's going to be rationalizations of the resource use, rationalizations of the output management, etc. So friends, I will close here and say that our entire agriculture process is going through a dynamic change, and just as EBA focuses on people as well as nature to bring about adaptation to the climate change that has happened, our new watershed guidelines, it depends upon the three basic principles of ecological sustainability, economic equality, and of course equity, because in India, where there are differences in purchasing power, equity is extremely important. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much. And I must just thank you for the opportunity that I got to work with WOTR and others in Maharashtra, a great state and a great success it will make and demonstrate to whole India and possibly to outside the world. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Ashok Dalwai. If I would have to write a tweet, I would say you have highlighted that it needs a comprehensive approach for achieving resilience. The examples you have mentioned were all guiding in this direction. Thank you so much for sharing your information. your ideas and your vision with us. And I can only say I fully agree. Climate change is a multiplier of already existing risks, and it creates new risks. And therefore, we need a systemic answer. And you provided information and you provided evidence that India and you in your work are going towards it. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, now it is time to hear from my colleagues how they managed to set up and conduct a process that brought all of us together from different stakeholders, how they managed to create an alliance for an enabling environment for scaling up EBA, and how they managed to work in these different countries like Guatemala and India, but how they managed to come up with an overarching idea. And therefore, I'm happy to give the floor to my colleague, Larissa Steen-Bhatia, who leads in our TMG organization, the nature-based solutions work. And she is very, very well connected to our colleagues in Guatemala and in India, and she is going to present us. Larissa, what did we really do, and what does it mean creating an enabling environment for scaling up EBA in a roadmap? Larissa, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, Alexander, for this kind introduction. So as you said, today we will be talking about the experiences and outcomes of our global project on ecosystem-based adaptation. This is a project that is also part of the International Climate Initiative funded by the German Federal Ministry for Environment. Next slide, please. This project is being implemented by a consortium of partners, namely by the host of this webinar, so TMG based in Germany, WOTR in India, and ADIMI and WWF Mesoamerica and Guatemala. The project started off in 2018 with the goal of analyzing and strengthening the enabling conditions under which EBA can thrive and be scaled. And in this way, it has been led by the questions of how can implementation of voluntary agreements, such as the Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the Agenda 2030 on Sustainable Development, be advanced at country level, and what role can EBA play here as a multi-benefit strategy. And here also we ask the question of how can multi-stakeholder processes support the mainstreaming and upscaling of EBA. Now, given the huge gaps in implementation of the SDGs and other voluntary global goals, we wanted to test an approach that seemed challenging yet promising. So we developed a roadmap to promote and upscale EBA, and this we did jointly with different stakeholders from different sectors and across levels. Next slide, please. So I would briefly share with you the general approach that we adopted before my colleagues will share with you the country-specific insights. Now, when we started our project in India and Guatemala, we realized that context-specific evidence on EBA is not really widespread, but it's of course very necessary to convince policymakers about the value of EBA. So collecting evidence on the benefits and effectiveness of EBA in different locations was very central to our work. And the insights from the local level then informed the priorities and action areas that the roadmap for upscaling EBA would have to consider. The common approach in Guatemala and India was also to set up a multi-stakeholder platform that brought together organizations and individuals from public and private sector, from research and civil society, and from local to national level. Another early insight was that with so many existing policies and programs, we had to find entry points for EBA if it was to be seriously taken up. Then another important step was to invest in communication and capacity development, as Dr. Dalwey had already mentioned. So to bring together traditional knowledge and technical know-how in order to increase both political and also societal support for EBA. Now, as regards then the actual work of the multi-stakeholder platform, These platforms were very special in that they went beyond dialogues. They resulted in action. People came together in an alliance to join their forces and to work together on concrete work packages. And this strong involvement then led to the acknowledgement and endorsement of the roadmaps and EBA. For example, in Guatemala 3 years ago, EBA was not everywhere much talked about. Today, it enjoys very high political support, as we heard from the Vice Minister of Water from Guatemala. So despite similar project design approaches, the processes in Guatemala and India have also been very different, of course, given their different political and societal context. So let us now hear from my colleague Arjuna Srinidhi from Water about how EBA became more than a 3-letter acronym in the Indian state of Maharashtra. Over to you, Arjuna. Thank you.
Thanks, Larissa. Hello, everyone. My name is Arjuna Srinidhi, and I work on climate change adaptation issues at the Watershed Organization Trust, or WOTR. Now, our project and the roadmap development focused on the state of Maharashtra in India. Now, Maha in the regional language means great, and Rashtra means state. So Maharashtra is literally the great state. And why not? With about 112 million people, it could well be the world's 12th most populated country. Even in area, it is about 3 times the size of Guatemala, or roughly the size of Germany. Unfortunately, Maharashtra is also very vulnerable to climate change for several reasons. Over 80% of the state consists of rain-fed drylands that are drought-prone and poor in natural resources. The frequency of droughts have increased 7-fold over the past 50 years. There are also floods due to the erratic weather, adding to the vulnerability of the farmers. Over 40% of the agricultural land is degraded, and groundwater levels are falling rapidly by 1 to 2 meters every year. Over 3/4 of the farmers are smallholders with less than 2 hectares of land. Their adaptive capacities are limited as they face rising deaths, distress migration, and even suicide in extreme cases. Also, the markets have pushed farmers into monocultures of cotton and sugarcane, aggravating the risk of crop failure. Against this background, we started our work by assessing the challenges and opportunities for upscaling EBA. Studying the government programs showed us that a number of them are specific to a certain sector, like water resources, agriculture, or biodiversity, often operating in silos. Standardized and rigid implementation methodologies that don't recognize locale specific issues and perceived trade-offs between ecosystem health and agriculture productivity by farmers, as well as the lack of financial resources and capacities of implementing agencies for some of the other challenges. We saw some opportunities too. One early insight was that considering the scale of the issues in Maharashtra, upscaling has to involve mainstreaming EBA into government policies and programs, while we also engage with other actors. The other significant opportunity we saw was that watershed development is a well-accepted response to the challenges of dryland areas, like for about 40 years, as Dr. Dalwai mentioned. This also has the potential to integrate several areas of intervention, and there are a number of success stories in this regard. But upscaling such success stories would require bringing together several stakeholders to see the value of such an integrated approach and to find resources, including technical and financial. Larissa has already explained the broad process that we followed to develop the roadmap. So I will focus on the process that we followed in Maharashtra specifically. We brought together several stakeholders from different sectors, from the local level to the state level, and had several rounds of multi-stakeholder consultations around the importance of EBA during 2019 to build awareness and generate a buy-in. We constituted an expert committee and held a series of virtual thematic dialogues during 2020 that covered the subjects of biodiversity, land and forests, agriculture, livestock, and water management. The purpose of these consultations was to discuss ideas on how to upscale and mainstream EBA into the different programs and policies of each sector, as well as how to improve the collaboration between sectors. Now here, Water's own insights in implementing and pioneering community-led watershed development initiatives was an important input. Finally, this collaborative process resulted in an evidence-based and demand-driven roadmap for promoting EBA and promoting and upscaling EBA in Maharashtra that was presented at the final state level consultation in 2021. While we don't have time to go into the details of the roadmap, I will briefly mention the 6 basic elements that all stakeholders agreed upon. A shared vision and understanding of EBA, mainstreaming the actions into government programs, building capacities of practitioners and local administration, identifying financial support, M&E mechanisms through the lifetime of the initiative, and identifying relevant links to global goals such as the SDGs and Paris Agreement. Considering the size and scale of Maharashtra, implementing this roadmap is not going to be quick or easy, but very necessary and certainly doable. With concerted efforts from all stakeholders, our roadmap suggests that this is possible by the end of this crucial decade of action from 2021 to 2030. Reflecting on the highlights of the roadmap development process, we find that facilitating the multi-stakeholder dialogues was perhaps the most significant one. Improving coordination between various stakeholders is something that is often mentioned in projects, but actually facilitating this despite the pandemic and the lockdowns was something that was a significant outcome for us. The result of these inclusive stakeholder dialogues was seen during our final state level consultations, where we got a unanimous acceptance of the EBA approach for building climate resilience in Maharashtra. 78% were in complete agreement with the joint statement released during this event, and a further 22% agreed with the overall approach, but with some feedback on the details. Overall, no one had any reservation about the EBA approach for Maharashtra. It was also interesting to see uptake of the term EBA in several state and national policy circles. For example, Dr. Dalwai, who spoke earlier, refers to EBA when he talks about reimagining the next generation of watershed development in India in various forums. The joint roadmap development with the various stakeholders also prompted the creation of a national network for collaboration on EBA, which I will return to in my last slide. And finally, this roadmap development process was a time of deep reflection for us at Water. A holistic approach to watershed development has always been a part of Water's DNA. However, the work on EBA highlighted the need to articulate our holistic approach as an ecosystem-based approach. There have been many lessons learned and insights gathered during the past couple of years. The unanimous acceptance of the roadmap from the diverse stakeholders showed us that getting a buy-in from early stages of the project was crucial. We believe what also contributed to the buy-in was an understanding of the value that different stakeholders saw in EBA from their different perspectives. For instance, the local community representatives realized that EBA doesn't lead to any compromises in income, and in fact, make it more sustainable or resilient. Government officials began to see synergies that the EBA approach has in existing programs related to watershed development or agricultural schemes. While these programs may not be ideal examples of EBA yet, with some tweaks here and there, they do have solid potential to become one. Senior government officials, especially those at the national level, also began to see the extent to which EBA can contribute to several global targets that India is also committed to. Even in terms of communicating these different benefits of EBA, having a customized outreach strategy for each stakeholder group is something that served us very well, like case studies, synthesis reports, capacity building workshops, blogs, and films for different audiences. We believe we have initiated a fair amount of momentum around EBA in Maharashtra, but this is definitely not where the roadmap ends. Our goal is a climate resilient, prosperous, and just future for Maharashtra, and in time, the rest of the country. The way we intend to go about this is to continue working closely with the government of Maharashtra and all other relevant stakeholders in order to implement and follow up on the roadmap. Continuous advocacy for EBA would focus on both international agreements such as the SDGs and Paris Agreement, but also on national and state level priorities, such as doubling farmers' income, addressing the agrarian distress in the country, making Maharashtra resilient to droughts while improving the health of the agroecology. And one concrete way in which we see the roadmap being implemented is through the launch of a network or collaborative on EBA. As mentioned earlier, this network is a result of the multi-stakeholder process through which we developed the EBA roadmap. This network will be called the Ecosystem-based Adaptation for Resilient Incomes, or ECOBARI, and will be a collaborative of civil society organizations, research institutes, thematic experts, private sector, and government officials, all keen on upscaling EBA in the country. We have already received letters of interest from several agencies and hope to have a launch in early November, for which we would welcome all of you. So that was the experience and insights from India. Please do write into us for further information. We would love to hear from each of you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to my colleague Larissa and to you, Ariona, for presenting the lessons learned. I would like to draw your attention that there's an interesting debate going on in the chat and also in the question and answers box, so that all the presentations so far have triggered interesting contributions, raised important questions, and I think we continue to share information. The beauty of Zoom is that we can travel within no time now from India to Guatemala. So it takes 0 seconds to go from Maharashtra to Guatemala, and I would like to invite Ana Victoria Rodriguez, Climate Change Officer at WWF Mesoamerica, based in Guatemala, to take the floor. And she's going to tell us how the roadmap for EBA in Guatemala was not only jointly developed, it was a joint effort with a range of actors, but also how this has already led to important political processes that have paved the ground for upscaling EBA. After Ana Victoria, I would like to invite Amelia Koch from the NGO ADIMI, a very good partner of ours, also based in Guatemala City, to show us how EBA is gaining more attention at municipal level in Guatemala. So join me to a trip to Guatemala to first talk about the national level, and then let's go to the local level in Guatemala. We will listen and we will hear 2 very important and interesting presentations. Ana Victoria, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Ana Victoria Rodriguez. I'm Climate Change Officer of WWF Guatemala. Guatemala, place of many trees. Its original meaning in indigenous language describes Guatemala's inherent biological richness. However, Guatemala records one of the highest deforestation rates in Latin America. Guatemala, a mega diverse but highly vulnerable country, it is one of the countries most affected by weather extremes and most vulnerable to climate change. Increasing climate vulnerability and poverty drive the vicious cycle of existing social and economic inequalities, thereby hitting the poorest hardest. A roadmap to a more resilient future. Despite many climate adaptation projects, natural resource degradation and climate change vulnerability remains challenges. It became clear that a more coordinated approach was required between different actors, sectors, and levels that will build on learning from long-standing community-led initiatives. Some of the elements of the roadmap include capacity building, monitoring, reporting, and verification system, finance strategy, mainstreaming EBA in policies, among others. What was the relation between the roadmap and the technical EBA group? To design a roadmap in a participatory way, the project brought together around 30 stakeholders from academy, public sector, private sector, as well as local, national, and international organizations, and create a platform, the Technical EBA Group. This group shared knowledge about EBA, But this platform went beyond. It brought institutions together to work on building blocks for upscaling EBA that resulted in several processes to create enabling conditions for upscaling and mainstreaming EBA into different policies. 2 years after the technical EBA group has been formed, it is a well-recognized platform to consult on EBA. The process creates ownership on all the stakeholders. As my colleague Larissa mentioned, the term EBA was not clearly known in Guatemala when we started the project. So one important element of the roadmap became to create a common understanding of what EBA means. We thus organized the first National EBA Forum in 2019 in partnership with members of the technical EBA group. This forum marked the first time that actors from different sectors came together to generate a common vision for EBA in Guatemala. This vision was manifested in a declaration that recognized the need to implement EBA on a larger scale in Guatemala. The declaration was signed by several ministries and organizations. Given the success of the first National EBA Forum, a second National EBA Forum followed in 2020, virtually due to COVID-19. And a third forum is planned for the end of this year. One of the processes that went beyond dialogues was the creation of different committees, one of which was the Indicator Committee. This committee aimed to develop a monitoring, reporting, and verification system to capitalize synergies between NDCs and SDGs and to align EBA with existing indicators in the country, resulting in a formal document with 7 EBA-related indicators. Another important element of the roadmap was mainstreaming EBA in existing national policies and international agreements. For example, EBA has been included in the 3rd National Communication to UNFCCC, and the technical EBA group has been recognized as an institutional framework to upscale EBA. The nationally determined contributions are in the process of being updated, and one specific EBA goal has been included. EBA has also been included in the national strategy of the CBD in 2018. Now, the government entity responsible for biodiversity forms part of the technical EBA group and has recognized it as a platform to consult the upcoming position of the country. Further, in this, it is planned to include EBA at the local level in the National Climate Change Adaptation Plan. What are the learnings of the One Roadmap and Many process? First, a common understanding of EBA was one of the building blocks for the joint effort between different actors. Strategic alliances and interinstitutional learning can be leveraged to upscale inclusive approaches such as EBA. The leadership of the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources is crucial to guide and motivate the technical EBA group to continue the implementation of the roadmap. What comes next? First, to incorporate greater participation of the private sector to the roadmap and the technical EBA group, to strengthen the technical EBA group to continue with the implementation and update of the roadmap, and to upscale EBA at the local level as it was done in the case of Chantla, which my colleague Amelia Koch of ADIMI will present. Amelia, the floor is yours.
Buenos días, buenas tardes. Voy a compartir con ustedes la experiencia de integrar la adaptación basada en ecosistemas en el Plan de Desarrollo Municipal y Ordenamiento Territorial con el objetivo de escalar la AVE desde lo local. Para este proceso, trabajamos junto con la Municipalidad de Chantla. Chantla está localizada en el departamento de Huehuetenango, en la región noroeste de Guatemala. Esta es la primer municipalidad en Guatemala donde la AVE se ha integrado en la política pública de desarrollo local. Ahora bien, ¿cómo se ha integrado la AVE en la política pública de Chiantla? Como mencionaron mis colegas anteriormente, la recolección de evidencias sobre los beneficios y la eficacia del AVE fue importante para persuadir a los responsables de la formulación de políticas públicas sobre el valor de la AVE. Para ello, realizamos un estudio de caso en el municipio de Chiantla. Allí investigamos una iniciativa AVE que lleva muchos años de ser implementada por la organización campesina Asociación de Organizaciones de los Cuchumatanes en Chiantla, conocida como ASOCUCH, y que el día de hoy estará con nosotros participando. Esta iniciativa tiene un enfoque que combina la diversificación de la producción agrícola, la agrosilvicultura y la conservación de los bosques, también conocida como sistema milpa, papa, ovino, bosque. Los hallazgos de este estudio mostraron cómo la AVE ayudó a las personas a adaptarse al cambio climático, a mejorar los servicios ecosistémicos, a fomentar la gobernanza participativa y la importancia de combinar los conocimientos tradicionales y técnicos, entre otros. Estos hallazgos fueron compartidos con la Municipalidad de Chiantla y como resultado se interesaron en incorporar la AVE en el Plan de Desarrollo Municipal y Ordenamiento Territorial. Para incorporar el enfoque de AVE en la política pública de Chiantla se definió una ruta metodológica que contiene 5 fases. La primera fase consistió en concientizar sobre el enfoque de AVE a las autoridades y actores clave a nivel local, utilizando el estudio de caso sistema milpa, papa, ovino, bosque. La segunda fase consistió en la autorización de integrar la AVE en la política pública local por parte de las autoridades locales a través de un acuerdo municipal y la conformación de un equipo técnico para realizar este proceso de integración. La tercera fase consistió en integrar la AVE en la política pública local a través de talleres técnicos con representantes de sociedad civil y organizaciones locales. En la cuarta fase se validó la política pública local actualizada con enfoque de AVE por parte del equipo técnico. La quinta y última fase es la aceptación y socialización de la política pública local actualizada con el enfoque de AVE por parte de las autoridades. Las lecciones aprendidas durante este proceso son que la existencia de la medida exitosa de AVE documentada en la región fue clave, pues permitió a las autoridades y actores locales comprender los beneficios socioeconómicos y ecológicos del enfoque AVE. También en Chiantla hay una fuerte organización social a nivel local. Los ciudadanos participan de manera activa en la gobernanza de sus recursos y que esto facilitó integrar la AVE en el plan de desarrollo local en colaboración con la comunidad. Debido al proceso participativo, se creó el apoyo social para la AVE, aumentando así la posibilidad de implementar la AVE de manera generalizada en las políticas públicas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ana Victoria and Amelia, for sharing the stories, your insights, and informing us about the roadmap process. Dear participants, we are not talking about technical issues. We are not talking about the fact that EBA is a proven concept and that there are many projects all over the world that have demonstrated EBA is working. We are not sharing some of the problems being experienced in EBA. We are talking about how to use the existing knowledge, the existing evidence to build up political momentum, to scale up EBA, ecosystem-based adaptation, and to gain political momentum. The key word is creating a roadmap in Maharashtra, in Guatemala, to build on the lessons learned, on the experiences of our colleagues, the implementing partners, and others, in order to gain traction towards adaptation. And this is what we are going to discuss also now in our panel. Dear participants, at the end of the panel, we will have the opportunity for you to raise your questions. My colleague Larissa will give you speaking rights after you have raised questions, and you will be able to speak. But before that, we are going to listen to a very experienced and distinguished panel. And I would like to start with giving the representative of a minority on the panel the floor. The only man, the only male participant on the panel exceptionally has the right to speak first. And therefore, I would like to invite our first panelist, Sergio Alonso, technical manager from the farmers organization Asokuch, composed from 23 smallholder farmers associations and cooperatives, bringing together 10,000 families located in a mountain area in northern Guatemala. He's going to speak on behalf of his constituency. And dear Sergio, can you share with us how your organization has been involved in the roadmap process in Guatemala, and what have been the main challenges in practicing EBA? And these challenges, they need to be addressed for scaling up EBA at local level. Sergio, the floor is yours, and we are really looking forward to your report.
Muchas gracias, muy buenos días, buena tarde, buena noche para todos. Para nosotros es de mucho agrado participar en este evento. Tal como lo indicaron, nuestra organización está conformada por pequeñas organizaciones de productores, principalmente organizaciones integradas por familias campesinas e indígenas y que habitan la Sierra de los Cuchumatanes en altitudes que van de 800 a 3.800 metros sobre el nivel del mar. En nuestro caso, nos incluimos al proceso de implementación de la hoja de ruta y también al estudio de caso que se realizó en el marco del proyecto, con el estudio de caso de una de las microcuencas en las cuales trabajamos. Nuestro enfoque ha sido muy vinculado al tema de trabajo a nivel de cuenca y microcuenca, y es uno de los tantos casos exitosos que tenemos en la Sierra de los Cuchumatanes, lo cual se ha construido con mucho trabajo, con participación de las comunidades. El estudio de caso se enfocó básicamente en identificar cuáles habían sido el fortalecimiento de los sistemas productivos, la mejora del conocimiento y las capacidades de los agricultores, también las capacidades de las organizaciones de productores presentes en el territorio o en la microcuenca, el manejo de bosque y el recurso agua, y el fortalecimiento de la inclusión y gobernanza y participación a nivel de las comunidades. Es importante indicar que durante los últimos 20 años, nuestra organización ha integrado acciones que vinculan la adaptación al cambio climático, manejo de recursos naturales, conservación de la biodiversidad, manejo y conservación de la agrobiodiversidad, la cual es de suma importancia vinculado al tema de seguridad alimentaria, el mejoramiento genético de especies menores, principalmente ovejas, y el desarrollo económico local en torno a cadenas de valor para generar ingresos económicos a nivel de las microcuencas. Como repito, utilizando como unidad de medida la microcuenca. Cuando escuchamos por primera vez el término adaptación basada en ecosistemas, no fue difícil hacer el vínculo al trabajo que ya veníamos realizando en la Sierra de los Cuchumatanes. Simplemente pudimos hacer la integración de las acciones para dar respuesta a la efectividad de las diferentes prácticas que ya realizábamos a nivel de las comunidades. Nuestra organización está convencida que es de suma importancia y que se debe de trabajar para continuar con el escalamiento. Sin embargo, debe de existir los recursos financieros económicos disponibles, tal como lo establece la hoja de ruta en el numeral 2. De lo contrario, el impacto será poco visible, ya que lo más tangible de parte de las instancias de gobierno, como el mismo Instituto Nacional de Bosques, lo constituye el programa de incentivos forestales, ProBosques y PIMPE, al cual nuestra organización y varias de nuestras organizaciones de base han tenido acceso. De hecho, hemos podido ingresar más de 15,000 hectáreas a este programa de incentivos forestales. Tal como lo indicaron las colegas que me antecedieron, se han realizado todos los esfuerzos para que el término AVE quede inserto en las comunicaciones de cambio climático, en los NDC y en las posiciones de país ante la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas sobre el Cambio Climático. Sin embargo, aún existe un largo recorrido para su implementación a nivel de Guatemala. Es necesario trabajar muy fuerte, principalmente con los gobiernos municipales, para que prioricen las asignaciones presupuestarias para implementar medidas AVEs, apoyar de manera directa a las comunidades indígenas y campesinas, quienes son los actores principales que buscan adaptarse a las condiciones cambiantes del clima día a día. Entonces nosotros estamos muy claros durante estos 20 años de trabajo que debemos de incluir a las comunidades para buscar su desarrollo, pero incluirlas y darle los medios necesarios para poder implementar las acciones integradoras que puedan provocar la adaptación al cambio climático y con vínculo directo a adaptación basada en ecosistemas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Let me raise a question directly to you. I'm really impressed that you, representing 10,000 families, and these families, they have to work very hard to earn their living, that you have spent so much time in supporting this roadmap process. What does this mean for your members, for the members in Guatemala? Is this an additional effort? Did they immediately respond in a positive way, or was it difficult to convince the farmers to take on another task beyond the daily work they have to do? In my country, it is not so easy to involve farmers and farmers associations in debates on global sustainability issues. And you have done it in Guatemala. Congratulations.
Bueno, nuestra organización ha trabajado muy fuerte en el tema de incidencia política, principalmente con el tema de los incentivos forestales. Y tenemos un recorrido muy fuerte, es más, nuestra organización estuvo participando muy activamente en la generación hasta de una iniciativa de ley que promovía el tema de los incentivos forestales para pequeños poseedores de tierra. Entonces, la dinámica de nuestra base, cooperativas y asociaciones, está muy clara. Si no trabajamos en acciones de incidencia política, entonces no vamos a tener los resultados a mediano plazo. Entonces, no fue difícil hacer ese vínculo de lograr que las organizaciones o los líderes campesinos se inserten en estos procesos. Entonces, estamos claros de que las herramientas se construyen, la hoja de ruta está, pero estamos también un poco preocupados porque tenemos la hoja de ruta, pero esperamos que realmente esto se convierta en una acción y que tengamos ese contexto, ese término de AVE realmente implementado en campo con acciones como las que tenemos nosotros, pero escaladas a nivel de otros territorios.
Thanks a lot, Sergio. Very clear. The roadmap needs to be translated into action. So we have a very clear cascade. We have the experience of EBA in the field. We have taken it up in a strategic and systematic way by a roadmap. But in the end, it has to be translated into action, and your farmers are waiting for it. Thank you so much for this clear message. Now, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to welcome Susan Chomba. Susan is the Director of Landscapes at the World Resource Institute Africa, based in Nairobi. Happy to see you again, Susan. Welcome. Thanks for taking your time. You are one of the leading scientists in ecosystem restoration and landscape management. We have been working together at ECRAF. I have to mention it, the World Agroforestry Institute in Nairobi. So what are your takeaways from the presentations you have listened so far? Challenges and opportunities, they are very similar in Guatemala and India. Now I'm really curious, what does this mean for Africa? So now you have the opportunity to provide 5 minutes insights of what EBA and the political process means for Africa. And then I will come up with a follow question after having monitored the chat. Susan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you, Alexander. Always a great pleasure connecting again. It's been such a delight listening to those cases from Guatemala and India. I take, quite a good note in terms of 3 key things. The first thing is on the context. I listened very keenly to try and understand whether the context in these countries differ and how, whether they differ between Guatemala and India and whether they differ with Africa, because we know very well that, we can't scale something until we understand the context within which it's an approach or a practice is being implemented. So I noted, for India, it was very, very similar, huge numbers of smallholder farmers, dependent, at least 80% of them dependent on rain-fed agriculture, land that is degraded, that's 30%. I think for Africa, we talk about 65% of agriculturally productive land being degraded in one way or another. And then, of course, I really took a point on the aspect of the larger political economy that is driving some of these decisions by farmers. So I took the note of the aspect of markets pushing farmers towards monoculture and therefore really putting a pressure on ecosystem services. And so you're trying to look at ecosystem-based adaptation in such a context, which is very, very similar to the African context. I also listened very keenly on some of the aspects of Guatemala and really looking at how some of the solutions that are being proposed within the roadmap. So I noticed across the 2 cases, there was a very strong focus on supportive policies and engagement with policymakers at the national level and at subnational levels. I think for Africa, I want to also mention, and this is not to try and make like Africa is a huge continent, there's a whole big of diversity, but in the countries that I've worked in, which is a lot of them on this continent, is that noting that kind of a starting point is not very unusual, because we realize that policy offers a key lever for scaling. But I think what I was struggling to try and put here together is whether then, if you look at the policy or if you address the policy issues, do you then address the scaling issue? So I would have wanted us to flesh out a little bit on that. And specifically, I do also agree that intersectoral coordination in this continent as well is quite very poor. There's a lot of sectors that work in silos. And so that, again, identifying that as a starting point is critical. I saw a focus on, in India, I think there was something very interesting that Dr. Dalwai mentioned on innovative scaling mechanisms, the use of, these huge groups of farmers and really transitioning that, using that as a scaling mechanism. So apart from policy, I did pick that in the Indian context, that it's not just policy, it's also, aggregation and working with huge groups of farmers to try and embed some of the innovative policies that the 2 countries are crafting. So I think that was a learning point for me in Kenya, in other African countries, because obviously extension services in this continent is, in a lot of countries is very, very weak. And so we have to, and I think we've, from a research perspective, Alexander, you'll be aware of a lot of policy documents that keep talking about weak extension services. And we know there's, underlying factors beyond that. There's the aspects of funding, there's the aspects of capacity. And so we've been sort of beating those drums and realizing there's no outcome. And so the question is, how can we be more innovative? And so these kind of models of working through farmer groups and really looking at ways of farmer to farmer learning, and of course, bringing in other actors who can work with farmers is really critical, rather than just relying on the model where an extension service from the government is supposed to meet all the capacity needs for farmers, and we know that that is probably a very long shot. So those were interesting for me in terms of the parallels, the differences that I was trying to drive with Africa. And of course, for me, what I really want to see is whether, when you have that policy engagement, as I mentioned, and there's the question of whether you want to start from top to bottom or bottom to top, or you want to work on both sides for ecosystem-based adaptation. I think what's critical is that ecosystem-based adaptation is not new, right? A lot of the terminology may not be familiar with the farmers, but when you look at the practices, when you start engaging with the farmers on what kind of soil conservation measures, kind of biodiversity protection measures, then they, so that is what we mean by ecosystem-based adaptation. But so that scaling, do we need to focus bottom up, top down, or both ways? So that for me, I would have loved to hear a little bit more on that. So just to summarize the issue of context, the issue of policy, and the issue of the scaling mechanism, whether we need to focus more on both bottom up and top down mechanisms. So I think that was a very rich discussion. I'm still trying to put together, some of the lessons that I think we can take for Africa. But I think a lot of projects that are being implemented here will have very similar approaches towards engaging on ecosystem-based adaptation, really.
Thanks a lot, Susan. I have a follow-up question. I have listened very carefully, and my impression is that your message is, we know that EBA is not new, it is working. We know that EBA is taking place under different circumstances, different agroecological conditions, but there's something at a higher level which all these projects have in common. They are dealing with small-scale farmers and with specific adaptation strategies for small-scale farmers to climate change. And here is my next question. You have a minute to answer it. Does this mean in the end that we need specific transformation pathways for small-scale farmers where we build up natural capital? A very clever guy, my friend Pawan Sukhdev, has once said, natural capital is the GDP of the poor. And if we don't build up the GDP in terms of natural capital, small-scale farmers cannot survive. We have two types of agriculture: intensive agriculture with high inputs, and we know it all. And we have kind of a nature-based agriculture where the natural capital is key. And any transformation strategy needs to build on natural capital. Would this mean that the World Food System Summit tomorrow in New York has to make very clear that there's a difference for adaptation for small-scale farmers based on natural capital, and that the large-scale agricultural units have to adapt in a very different way, but both of them have to move towards sustainability? Only a scientist can answer this in a minute.
Absolutely, absolutely, Alexander. And I think I didn't get the context in Guatemala, whether it's also very similar in terms of really dealing with smallholder farmers. But absolutely, the natural capital is critical, and it's critical in the sense that it is going to be what is going to address aspects of food security, and it's going to be the aspect that the farmers will use to also emancipate themselves economically and socially. And so when that natural capital is depleted, you're absolutely correct that it is the currency for the poor, but also their use of that currency affects everybody else in the world, because what we are seeing is if you have unsustainable natural capital, depletion of the natural capital, then of course, you have other transitional kind of challenges in terms of job creation, in terms of economy, but also pressure on the remaining natural ecosystems. So, and the mechanisms that are really, really important for smallholder farmers will differ from the large-scale farmers, and especially in the global south, where again you see that a majority of smallholder farmers really depend on agriculture as their way of economic, and they are the majority. So, for instance, in Africa, you have the smallholder farmers feeding about 70% of the population. Whereas when you compare with industrial agriculture, you have a smaller number of farmers in a highly subsidized and supported environment, feeding the larger population. So it's almost like the opposite. So I couldn't agree more. But in terms of really looking at where ecosystem-based adaptation comes in for both, it is, I think, to be fair, the smallholder farmers have been working more closely and along with nature for a long period of time. If you look at mechanized industrial agriculture, it is exactly the opposite, right? So what the smallholder farmers need is really that supporting structures to help them to scale what they already know, what they're already doing in a lot of places. A lot of them, and in fact, in looking at aspects like agriculture inputs, they gravitate towards, what again, Dr. Ashok mentioned, that, because you're looking at economic trade-offs, how much am I going to save from buying fertilizers, pesticides, if I use biological and natural methods? And if you can be able to make the case for that with smallholder farmers, absolutely. So you're really working with what they already have. Whereas on industrial models, it's the opposite. We are trying to convince farmers who've not been working with these kind of structures to start adopting them in that kind, and so the dynamics are different, but we need to work towards the same goal.
Thanks a lot, Susan. We will follow up on this discussion. This is not the last interaction, but this is a perfect way to invite our next speaker, Namita Vikas, founder and managing director of Auctus ESG, a private company based in Delhi. And you are advising companies on how to invest their money in a sustainable way. And this is exactly the key word, investment in a sustainable way. We have heard earlier that funding for climate change adaptation and EBA is urgently needed. I personally don't think that public money can solve it all. So when we talk about upscaling, we need the private sector. We need private sector investment, but in the right way. And therefore, please tell us shortly what your firm is doing in sustainable finance and how you have perceived this discussion. Namita, happy that you are here and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexander. And it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. We've heard a lot of earlier speakers mention about how government, civil society, multilateral agencies are appreciating the effectiveness of EBA and its multiple benefits. And EBA is now being used in hundreds of projects across the world, also getting finance. One of the classic examples is the government of Germany that has funded many EBA projects in the tune of over 130 million euros since 2008. But given the connect between natural ecosystems and socio-economic activity, if business as usual continues, wherein the world's ecosystems have already declined in size and quality by 47% versus the estimated baselines, then the loss to biodiversity will represent an economic loss of over $479 billion per year. And this is almost 50% of the global GDP is said to be moderately or highly dependent on nature, very much linked to natural capital depreciation. So to tackle this interlinked crisis of climate, biodiversity, land degradation, a total investment of $8.1 trillion is required by 2050, and we have just about $50 to $80 billion per year. So the investment gap, one must also recognize the fact that is being worsened by public incentives and subsidies that are potentially harmful to biodiversity or ecosystem-based activities. And pulling this back is in the benefit of climate adaptation finance needs. So, given the interconnectedness between the natural ecosystems and the socio-economic activities, the role of financing becomes even more acute. And that's where Octus CSG, my company, is working with governments, working with multilateral agencies, as well as financial institutions to see how these could look at the challenges and the opportunities. So, a case in point is biodiversity finance, for example. This whole space is evolving. Projects are often based on unproven concepts and technologies, and that makes the perceived risk as very high by investors or by bankers. And that implies developers are often unable to show a track record in terms of cash flow generating projects or scientific evidence data. In India, for instance, the largely asset collateral driven banking culture, the banking lending culture, makes it even tough to get credit for such high risk perceived nature projects. And next, there is the high dependency on externalities and the variables involved. So in minor fluctuations in any one of these potentially reduces the expected cash flows, and climate risks alone today add to so many variables that it impacts the risk profile and the investor's interest. And the third point is on the long gestation periods of these kind of projects, right? Most nature-based or ecosystem-based projects start producing cash flows, which bankers or financiers are looking at only after a few years. And given these tenors are really long, it is not attractive for shorter tenor financing. And for those investors that are looking to short to medium term kind of returns. So we need to really look at innovative financing mechanisms to be able to make good of this opportunity. And there are, financing instruments that have shown or demonstrated impact on ground. So for example, the Althea Climate Fund focuses on projects aimed at REDD+. It is supporting the scale up of the Sumatra Merang peatland project with an impact investment of 5.1 million euros that is restoring more than 22,900 hectares of peatland rainforest in the Merang region. So, these are kind of models that can get replicated across India or in Guatemala. And then there are structures like blended finance or sustainability bonds. I think forest bonds, there's been an uptake, and this is a very interesting instrument where a lot depends on the structuring. So the bond issuer generates revenues by placing the yet to be issued carbon or ecosystem service credits as collateral, and by selling certified forest related products such as timber or ecotourism. So these are a kind of instruments that need to be looked at for EBA solutions and for EBA financing. Environment impact bonds, and these are very replicable. So what we do is we work with institutions, we work with governments to look at where is the opportunity and how could we structure these kind of products, and also look at leveraging DFI funding. So how do you look at the funding that is available from the development financial institutions for such facilities, and then materialize them into actual financing that happens in countries. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Namita. You brought in many new aspects, and that's the reason why we have invited you. Thank you so very much. When talking about upscaling EBA, it would mean, after having listened carefully to you, that the private sector, people like you, have to be involved in roadmap processes, so that these roadmap processes also take into account the perspective you have just presented. Under which conditions can we invest in nature-based solutions? Are they high risk or low risk? So that we do not present a roadmap looking only at public money, but also looking at investment opportunities, which in the end should, of course, be good for the farmers, improve their livelihoods, generate more income, but also creating opportunities for responsible investment. Not for everybody wanting to earn money, but for responsible investment, for sustainability. So you should be invited to such roadmap processes. And what would you bring into these debates? How should a roadmap process look like so that it is attractive also for you?
Thank you. I think one very important point that came out from all the presentations that were made earlier is the collaborative approach that was taken, which made it possible. And I think, the good news is that investments in nature-based solutions will have to triple by 2030 and increase fourfold by 2050. So this serves as a big financing opportunity that nobody can ignore. Neither can governments ignore, neither can central bank regulators ignore, nor can DFIs or developmental players or key financial institutions ignore this opportunity. And the alpha will get created by having public as well as private sector to come together to be able to mobilize that capital. And the right regulatory conditions exist where structuring of partnership-based financing models, these have also shown success. So direct private investments into climate and nature conservation, I think needs to be scaled up by these kind of private, public-private kind of partnerships or approaches. I think one of the very important aspects you mentioned about the GDP of poor, and I would like to mention here about the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility of Indonesia, which leveraged private finance for creating public good by raising over $95 million of sustainability bonds to fund rubber plantations on degraded land with an aim to increase the biodiversity buffer zones, thus scaling investment and resulting in enhancing the GDP for the poor. I think these kind of mechanisms is what is required. And here also, positive incentives play a big role. So how do government or how do economic policy instruments like positive incentives actually provide the price signals to producers and consumers to behave in an environmentally sustainable way? I think that is a very important point to be noted. And research organizations which have played a big role in, because this is an evolving space, right? And we need a lot of researchers and scientists like Dr. Susan, who would bring in the aspects of science. And this is all about science-based origination or science-based targets that we need to look at. And that is what is very much importantly to be noted. You mentioned about at the beginning, comprehensive approach to achieving a kind of a systemic answer. And that includes all of this, including finance for the entire upscaling of EBA. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Namita. I would like to alert my colleagues in TMG. Most likely tomorrow in our internal meeting, I will raise the question, what kind of work do we have to do to support responsible investment in EBA, creating an environment where the right people invest and not the wrong people try to make a maximum profit. Thanks a lot for having triggered this idea. And this is perfect now, again, to invite our next guest, Liz Moulin-Bernhard from UN Environment Program. Liz is the coordinator of the Global Adaptation Network, founded 2010. The Global Adaptation Network provides a worldwide platform to distribute and exchange climate change adaptation knowledge. And Liz, from your perspective, you are the network for adaptation. What challenges, but also what opportunities are you encountering in bringing adaptation solutions to scale? Small scale is easy, but large scale is what we have to do tomorrow. Liz, we are waiting for the answer.
Thanks so much, Alexander. And it's a pleasure to be here on the panel today and also to listen to the very insightful and incredible perspectives of all of the voices we've heard in the session so far. So thank you so much for having us join you. As Alexander mentioned, I coordinate the Global Adaptation Network, which is within UNEP's UN Environment Program's Nature for Climate branch. And one of the things that we've been hearing about today, I think several of the panelists, Alexander and Susan mentioned very specifically, is that EBA is really not a new topic. We've had a mandate at UNEP since 2010. Member states have asked them to help them really increase their ambition and planning, action, and access to finance for adaptation, in particular looking at ecosystem-based approaches. We currently do that in around 50 countries around the world. But really, it's in the past few years that we've really seen an interest in EBA spike. We've seen so much of an uptake and uptick really in the interest in EBA, and that's very gratifying to see. I wanted to bring in one very specific perspective into this panel that I think is very much aligned with what we're discussing, and that is the very exciting example of the new global EBA fund under ICI, which is being implemented by UNEP and IUCN thanks to Germany's very generous support. The Global Adaptation Network, as part of UNEP, is really helping to support the fund by helping to meet its goal of finding innovative and catalytic EBA actions and working to scale up EBA barriers that we know exist. So in order to support that fund, the Global Adaptation Network has been carrying out a number of global and regional stakeholder dialogues to identify those barriers and how to best overcome them. What we found is that we really look at three categories of specific challenges or barriers to EBA that we're looking at. One of them is what we see as a general lack of knowledge or understanding or appreciation of the benefits of EBA. A second barrier is governance and policy challenges. And the third that we're looking at is limited access to finance to scale up EBA. And I just wanted to give a few reflections on the work that we've been carrying out over the past few months, because I think it really dovetails well with the great work of the roadmaps that we've been hearing about in India and Guatemala in this session. The first lesson that I think that we can say that we've really learned is that we see value in helping to bring people together, bring stakeholders together at the regional level. In the opening remarks from Guatemala, from our distinguished speaker, we heard that countries often find great value in speaking with their neighbors. There are often valuable lessons to share and shared commonalities and understandings along linguistic lines, but also geographically, politically, or culturally. So that value of sharing information and knowledge at a regional level is something we found very helpful in the EBA context. Second lesson that I would say that we'd like to share is that, as Dr. Ashok noted in the context of India, there's really a crucial need to talk to local and indigenous groups directly about their perspectives to give them a voice in national and international processes. This can really help gather and incorporate local and traditional knowledge and combine that with other bodies of scientific knowledge. But also, I think, just as importantly, is that it can help us create a sense of ownership for the ideas and a shared vision, a shared roadmap, as we're talking about here, which is so crucial because ultimately these are groups that need to implement and see the benefit of any EBA intervention on the ground. So ideally, you'd want to have that kind of process that helps to build a kind of community of practice and that can continue sharing knowledge and ideas and have a shared sense of ownership long after an organization like ours may have come in to help a specific process. A third lesson that we've learned is, and this may sound really a bit cliche, but the importance of not preaching to the converted. Our colleague in the panel, Namita, really brought this home in her intervention, but often I think we can find ourselves in a bit of an EBA echo chamber, where we're talking a bit to the converted, those who already know the term EBA, those who are already in that EBA crowd. But some of the most impactful and I think interesting conversations that we've had are when we're not talking to an EBA crowd, but rather bringing our conversations into other groups. So groups of youth, groups of major groups and stakeholders that UNEP works with, faith-based organizations, representatives from the private sector, international development banks. So colleagues who have a lot, I think, to contribute to the conversation, but may not be the ones that we automatically would be speaking to. So that we found extremely valuable. And finally, I think that it's really crucial, as we've heard our colleagues, Larissa and also Amelia really drew upon in their remarks, we need to make sure that these conversations are not happening in isolation, but that they're really tied at the beginning and at the end to larger processes. So for example, we've had a number of conversations within meetings of member states or initiatives that have identified a kind of adaptation priority gap or a need, where we can then embed that conversation about what the EBA solutions to that might be. And ultimately, we want to then make sure that those solutions and those conversations are helping to build into national planning for that country. So it could be national adaptation planning, NDCs, or other national commitments. And ultimately, we really need to help countries and other stakeholders develop fundable proposals for projects that can actually help to close the gaps and overcome EBA barriers that they've identified. And that's one of the really neat and gratifying things I think that we've seen with the Global EBA Fund, is that we're trying to help build that continuum of the conversation into, hopefully, very innovative and catalytic projects in EBA that can then help a country meet its commitments. So those are just some of the 4 of the key lessons that I wanted to share, Alexander, that I really resonated with me as I listened to the contributions of the panel. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Liz. And I'm pretty sure that there was a 5th key message you have sent to all the participants. UNEP is now distributing money. Please call me. And of course, this is really great. And we are aware that you are managing the Global EBA Fund. And we are here, of course, you rightly identified, we are within the EBA community. But we try to do something quite innovative, trying to link existing EBA projects and their good results into national roadmaps, serving both climate change agenda and SDG agenda. As I said in the beginning, every dollar has to achieve multiple benefits. And now my key question to you, what needs to be done in prioritizing the EBA funding when it comes to support of upscaling processes, and what kind of accountability do we need? Because we can fund projects for the next 200 years. In the end, it's not going to change if we don't upscale it and if we don't have accountability.
Those are excellent questions, and I can say, you know, we are helping to hold the purse strings for the funds that is being dispersed together with IUCN. Just as an aside, a few days ago, we ended our 2nd call for proposals for the Global EBA Fund. I'm not even sure if Birte knows this yet, but we had more than 600 applications, which is extremely gratifying to see. The interest in the fund and the proposals that we're seeing are absolutely out of this world and quite exciting. One of the things that I think is so interesting about the fund and this whole process is that we have quite an iterative process. We don't know, honestly, right now, what innovation or catalytic activities really look like. We are really wide open to hear what kind of interesting ideas we're getting from the proposals coming into the fund. And through dialogues like this, through regional and other global stakeholder dialogues, we really want to hear from people like you, what is working? What does innovation look like? How can we really scale up EBA? So that's a quite exciting prospect and process that we're going through. One of the things that's really interesting about the fund is that it does not fund governments directly. Yeah. However, in order to be successful for the fund, you do need to show that the proposal that you have is going to, in some way, help a country meet national and global commitments. So it really should be well embedded and justifiable within biodiversity targets or SDG targets or an NDC or a NAP. So any successful applicant to the fund will really need to show how it's helping a country overcome those barriers and implement its priorities. I truly believe, although the fund is generous, it's a small grants facility, right? So the amounts that are being funded are between $50,000 and $250,000, and it's over only a few years of time. So what we really need to see, we know that EBA and anything to do with ecosystems doesn't take 3 to 5 years. It takes 20, 30, or 50 years. So what we really know, what we need to see is that there is a theory of change built in, and how additional stakeholders, how will additional funds be leveraged? How will additional stakeholders beyond who's putting in the application now, how will that be taken on? How will ownership be created? So that really the long-term investment that needs to be there can be demonstrated. And I think that's really crucial, Alexander. It takes many people to make an EBA intervention successful.
Thanks a lot, Liz. This was a great summary at the end, also bringing in the perspective, how much time does it take to be successful? The easy solutions are quick. Maybe they are not solutions, they are only quick, but what we are presenting is effective, long-lasting, and it is also, what we are proposing is also able to adapt to changing climatic conditions. The world is not as stable as it has been over the last year. So thank you very much for having presented this. I was looking at who has raised his or her hand here in the chat, because I would like to invite now people. Do you want to raise questions to whomever? Do you have a comment? Not longer than a minute, but now I would like to open the floor for all the participants. And if you click on the hand here, we will manage, I hope, technically that you can speak. Is there a need to really intervene here and to provide a comment? Feel free. And the more you show up, the more likely it is that UNEP will go.
I just want to comment on the information given. Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
If you see me now, yeah.
I can see you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. My name is James. I'm the National President of United Nations Environment Ecosystem-based Adaptation for Food Security Assembly Nigeria. And I'm also a kind of a think tank for the ICP in terms of integrated development initiative on climate change in Nigeria as well. I just want to mention concerning the insight of Liz concerning the EBA fund. When we are talking of upscaling, the area of the normal production of the small scale farmers is well known, but upscaling now is where do we go? The fund they brought out, which a lot of people have applied for, they need to be more transparent with it in terms of giving an insight of, if you are not qualified, they need to tell you, because we are all in any area of capacity building, to learn more that I didn't qualify, these are the things you need to do. Because we are only trying, like, I love what people did today, bringing a lot of insight, bringing a practical perspective in upscaling EBA. We need to showcase the area that, look, if you apply and you are not getting any result, it's not by saying that if you are not being contacted now shows you are not qualified. They need to be more transparent, to be more informed people that these are the criteria that they needed, because we need this EBA to be upscaled. Look at what IPCC have just presented, that we are going beyond the 1.5 degree centigrade we are targeting. It's no longer a comedy, it's no longer a joke. And we don't need to play with this around. So more transparent concerning what is that. They're doing wonderfully concerning the insight of the EBA fund they are creating, but more insight in terms of being transparent and giving more information concerning the EBA fund. Thank you.
That's a great comment. Thank you so very much. And I can see Liz nodding. She will take it forward. I don't think that we can go into specific discussions here on single cases, but before I ask Liz if you want to respond, or anybody else, is there anyone else who wants to raise his or her hand and make an intervention? I'm looking in the chat box. There are discussions going on. Liz, do you want to briefly comment on it without going into individual cases? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Alexander. And thank you so much, James. It's an excellent question, and you're absolutely right. As we move forward with the fund, we plan to be giving more information about how we really identified what we thought would be the most innovative and catalytic within the applications that we received. And sometimes it's just looking at something that is completely new, something we've never heard of before that you might want to try to test out and see where it goes. So we will absolutely be sharing that information as soon as we can over the coming months. Just wanted to note two things. One is that the fund, it has a rolling application, right? And so every few months, we will be, there are many, many chances to apply to the fund. It goes for the next 5 years, at least twice a year, and potentially more often. We'll be stopping and looking at what we have. And we really expect also to have some targeted calls on very specific priority areas and topics. And so there are many opportunities to apply. So I just want to let you know that we're really very much at the beginning of this process. The second thing I think we should note is that we, together with IUCN, we will have a capacity building program set up that helps those who've applied to the fund, but maybe haven't yet been successful, to understand why, and maybe revise their application and resubmit it to a future call. So we will be doing that as well. So just to let you know, we welcome your and everyone else's proposal to the fund, and that it is an iterative process that we really hope will be a conversation we have together over the coming years. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Liz.
Hello.
One second. Thanks a lot, Liz. And I fully understand that an innovative approach also needs time to learn the lessons, and it will improve stepwise and getting better all the time. Thank you very much. So I have another hand. Negash Bekena Turga wants to provide a comment. Please go ahead.
Thank you, facilitator. I am Negash Bekena from Ethiopia, General Manager for Ethiopian Apiculture Board. I have a small comment or maybe an idea to be considered in global funding for EBA. In developing countries like Ethiopia, you see, to implement the EBA solutions, you see there will be a challenge of food security and other issues. Therefore, the solutions in the EBA should consider the income or the production system that are badly needed by the community. In this case, beekeeping, as we know, is the cleanest production system, and it does not affect the environment or the ecosystem, but even it enhances the biodiversity and the ecosystem services, which can directly help the EBA solution system. Therefore, in global beekeeping, in the global EBA solution or funding, I think it is good to consider projects like beekeeping that can be implemented in relation to the EBA solution. You see, they can enhance the household income for the poor households, again, without affecting the environment. Therefore, this is, I think, very much in line with the EBA system. Let's say Ethiopia has about 10 million bee colonies. And when we go for improvement of this sector, we can very much work for the environment or ecosystem services. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for bringing up this important topic and for demonstrating how broad EBA really is. And I have seen that you also provided strong and very good comments in the chat box. So for those of you,
yes,
who are more interested, look into the chat box. Is there another person before we have to come to wrapping up, because I want to invite, after my brief synthesis, Birte Derricks, a senior advisor at the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature, Conservation and Nuclear Safety. Without her support and without the work of the ministry, this meeting and our EBA work would not have taken place. And I guess that also Liz would not have money to distribute it. Therefore, it's very important to invite her at the very end to wrap it up. But I would like to try to do a synthesis before, but there's one more opportunity. Is there anybody else to provide a comment? I don't see it. In British pubs, they call it last order. If you don't do it, there's nothing to drink, and you have not raised your hand, and therefore no additional question. Thanks a lot. So my very brief summary, and I would like to start with something that is coming very often at the end and then very short, sometimes also forgotten. My first key message is I would like to thank our partners in this project. Asukuch, Water, WWF Mesoamerica, ADIMI, you really have shown extraordinary commitment to implement this project in the time of a COVID crisis. Let us not forget, you have worked under very special conditions, and it would have been difficult enough under normal circumstances, but I would like to congratulate you for having done this under these really difficult circumstances, and you have provided very, very good results, and your work has been the basis for what we have presented here. Let me also include, and please, Larissa, tell it your team, our own people. The collaboration between Larissa, her team, and you in the field has also been limited. We had to use all these online channels. Sometimes they work very well, sometimes they don't work very. Congratulations. You have laid the foundation for what we have done here. So coming to the other messages. One, EBA makes a difference and can make more differences when it comes to adaptation. We know the examples from Guatemala and Maharashtra, and we know it also from other parts in the world. The big step forward with designing a roadmap is that we have managed to bring EBA actors together and to create a process where EBA is introduced at the national level on the one hand, but also linked to the local level on the other hand. So we did not only move an EBA process up to a higher level, the linkage between the local level and the higher level is still there. And I think this is really, really important for harnessing the benefits of EBA. You need the examples, you need the stakeholders on the ground, but you have to translate it at a political level into a roadmap process. And you have managed to do so. And many of the projects you are running have never been designed to work towards a roadmap process. Suddenly and out of the blue, we came in and we said, you are doing great work. Let's add an additional challenge to your work. How can we design a roadmap process so that the local level is linked to the national level and that we can earn multiple benefits? This was kind of an institutionalization of EBA. And I really hope that this continues. We all know it's easy to create a kind of a working group, and when projects are over, the working group is not continuing. And therefore, I really hope that this collaboration between the local level and the national level and the work presented by our guests and the keynote speakers in the beginning is moving ahead and provides valuable insights of how EBA can be used to serve the big international agreements. So, first message. Second, we are aware that these roadmap processes has to be at a higher level because it has to look at different local conditions. The conditions at the local level are different, but in the end, and here I would like to use a word we have used quite often before, the conditions are same, but different. And therefore, roadmaps are well suited to respond to the need of different actors, including different actors, in order to create success stories for EBA. Let us not only talk about there is not enough money for EBA, let us also be proud and sell the success stories. Let's make Namita being interested in EBA, looking for opportunities to invest, and let us also highlight that we have managed not to complain that there is no upscaling, but that we have found an upscaling mechanism in the roadmap. A long way has to be gone, but we really have managed it. So what can we, and that's my third message, learn from other sectors, for example, health, to develop a better understanding of blended finance mechanisms? Public sector, private sector, based on the experience, based on the support we are getting from the countries. How can we blend investment so that Namita and others are investing, that private sector is investing, that we use public money, but also philanthropic organizations, public donors, and. So blending investment, well designed, maybe Liz, you have an idea how to best do it, is maybe a way forward. And in this regard, we have to talk about what kind of risks do we have to face. This is innovative. Not everything will go well. Who is covering the risks? Who is guiding it? What kind of assurance do we need in order to go ahead? And by the way, what kind of accountability do we really need for it? And therefore, my last comment is, before handing over to Birte, we know that we have to act quick, that action is urgent, but we have to have a long-time perspective. If we think that EBA is solving the problem of adaptation to climate change by tomorrow, even with more money, it would be wrong. We have to have an adaptive approach. It also needs kind of an adaptive management approach, because we very often learn while we go. Based on the experience we have so far in different adaptation processes, we have to develop a longer-term perspective. And let me reiterate what I tried to say in the beginning. We, in the industrialized world, we are responsible for climate change. It's our emissions, also our historical emissions. We have to limit our emissions in order to give you more time and space for adaptation. If we don't limit our emissions, it will be much more urgent. And therefore, there is a joint responsibility for working together. It's great that the ministry has provided this funding to UNEP and IUCN. It's great that the projects have been funded, but the responsibility, the political responsibility, goes beyond. And therefore, EBA is for me a good example how we can work together in one world in order to tackle challenges which will affect all of us, some sooner, some harder, other later, but it's a joint responsibility. And therefore, I'm really happy that we have the ICI project, that the ministry is working so hard, that the ministry has kickstarted some years ago this discussion. And therefore, again, warm welcome to Birte Derricks, Senior Advisor at the Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. And your department is in charge of the International Climate Initiative. You have supported the implementation of ecosystem-based adaptation since many years. We are happy that you have done it. We are excited that you are here, and you have the last word. What are you taking away from this meeting? So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Good day to all of you, dear partners and colleagues. After listening for 2 hours, I'm happy to share my thoughts on today's meeting. First of all, I would like to thank you all for participating in today's event and sharing the lessons from India and Guatemala. As part of BMU's International Climate Initiative, I'm responsible for the adaptation portfolio of the ICI. That's how we call it in short. And since the beginnings of ICI in 2008, it was our aim to support EBA action from pilot projects and knowledge generation to upscaling and mainstreaming. This is where we have arrived today, or where we are working on today. We are pleased that ICI has contributed to make EBA a firmly established approach for adapting to the impacts of climate change. This decade will be decisive to fight the climate and biodiversity crisis. Undoubtedly, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is a top priority also for Germany, especially for those countries with big carbon footprints. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, how can we make our societies, our economies, and the natural world adapt to the effects of climate change that are already happening today and those that we will face in the future? And I think that we can only be resilient if we invest in nature. Ecosystem-based adaptation is a systemic response to the crisis of our times. It is about preserving the basis on which our lives depend. It's about fighting climate change, but also about reversing the degradation of ecosystems, conserving our water resources, restoring our soils on which our food security depends. The presentation and discussions today showed us a pathway to make this possible. This project in Guatemala and India builds on connectivity, diversity, and participation. It connects knowledge and experiences from long-standing EBA initiatives at local level with policy processes at state and national level. May it be at state level in India or at national level in Guatemala. Multi-stakeholder platforms bring together different people, institutions, and knowledge systems and connect them in a strategic alliance to work together for enhanced resilience. And I think this is exactly what makes this project so unique and valuable, because it succeeds in addressing the challenge to bring everyone to the table. Having established EBA roadmaps in both countries in such a participatory and inclusive manner is exactly what is needed. As we have learned throughout today's session, sustainability and success of a project can only be achieved when multiple stakeholders are convinced that EBA is the right approach to tackle threats to climate and biodiversity in a holistic manner, and when these stakeholders are involved in the project from day one. We all know that EBA is by definition a people-centric approach, meaning that transformation and sustainability can only be achieved when the diversity of local actors and knowledge is at the core of the EBA measures. Leading up to the CBD COP15 in Kunming and the UNFCCC COP26 in Glasgow, we would like to encourage you to use this momentum to continue promoting EBA on various levels. With your support, more and more NDCs, NAPs, and other sectoral policies will include EBA approaches as proposed measures. As we heard today, replicating successful pilot projects is not enough. We need to work on the framework conditions, on the funding gaps, on cross-sectoral collaboration, especially with the private sector, so that we can scale up EBA at the required speed and at the required scale. Since access to finance and financing instruments for EBA measures remains central to enhance partnerships, we would like to encourage you to regularly check funding opportunities via the ICI Small Grants Program or through the Global EBA Fund that Liz has already mentioned before. I would like to thank the project team as well as the political partners for your efforts in implementing this project and sharing your experiences on how to create enabling conditions for EBA upscaling. It is always a pleasure for me to participate in the events of the EBA community, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from this diverse and interesting group of speakers. Have a good rest of the day, and thank you very much.
Birte, thanks a lot. I can join you in thanking all the speakers, the panelists, the participants, all who have actively participated in preparing this meeting. But my thank would not be enough if I would not especially thank the interpreters, Sophia and Patricia, who made it possible that we understand each other. And apologies if I have spoken too fast. If something was not clear, the interpreters, I think, will have found a way to inform all of us. Thanks a lot. Before you all leave, I would like to invite you to take 1 minute and participate in a poll and answer 5 short questions in the pop-up window, which should show up now, and it does. Thanks a lot, Bruno, so that you can say, where are you coming from? What type of organization are you doing? And so answer the 5 questions. And I'm not allowed to answer the question, so it's only up to you and we cannot influence it. Please answer the questions. Thanks again. Wish you a good morning, a good night, or wherever you are in the world. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thanks a lot and hope to see you soon or to continue to work together. Thank you very much and bye-bye.